Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
We're kicking off our Adventures in Faith series for Wednesday night, and I'm going to be sharing the message on the journey within. Chapters 1 and 2, Eric Butterworth's book, Discover the Power Within You. If you're new to our series and you'd like to follow along with the readings, we do have his book in our bookstore, and of course you can get it online as well and join in, because the whole community here at Unity of Houston is together studying this deep unity teaching of Discover the Power Within You. But to start us off, I thought I'd share a couple of Jesus jokes, if that's okay with you, that I thought were fun. Did you know that they had cars in Jesus' time? Yes, the Bible said that the disciples were all in one accord. What kind of car did Jesus drive? A Chrysler. And the last one, if Mary had Jesus and Jesus is the Lamb of God, does that mean that Mary had a little lamb? Just for fun. Anyway, so we're kicking off our series, how Jesus showed us how he discovered the power within him. And he was the great example, not the great exception. So important to know about this message that if we just know that Jesus did this and he demonstrated his divinity, how great that is, and just studying it, and that's wonderful, but what does that really mean for us? And so we're going to get into that a little more deeply. Wanted to share with you a poem that appears right at the end of chapter 1 in Discover the Power Within You, the first chapter, which is called The Eternal Quest. And it's by the wonderful English poet, 19th century English poet, Robert Browning, and it's called Paracelsus, and this is how it goes. Truth is within ourselves. It takes no rise from outward things, whatever you may believe. There is an inmost center in us all where truth abides in fullness, and all around, wall upon wall, the gross flesh hems it in. This perfect, clear perception, which is truth. A baffling and perverting carnal mesh binds it and makes it all error, and to know rather consists in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than in effecting entry for a light supposed to be without. I love that term, imprisoned splendor, that there's this spark of the divine that's within us, and it seems imprisoned because we're all in the sense consciousness, we're all in things of the outer, we're trying to live from outside in. And so this is a whole paradigm shift of learning to live from within out that we're looking at here. And it's an eternal quest. It's a journey, right? It's not like you discover the power within you, you learn that, God is in you, you are divine, and I'm there, done. It's a journey. So humankind has been on this quest as far as we know, a quest for meaning, a quest for truth, a quest for God. Eric Butterworth says, the pages of history tell and retell the story of mystic teachers who found it and of ensuing religions that lost it. So our history is, we find a prophet who had a mystical experience, and we're like, wow, look at what happened to him or her, and we follow them and study them, and we lose the within. We lose our own mystical experience. Eric Butterworth, he alludes to it in the book, but it's not quite in this chapter. I wanted to share with you. He learned about the 5 M's of religion, and he talked about it. It got it from a philosophy professor in Southern California. The 5 M's of religion: man, message, movement, machine, and monument. So all religions begin with a man or a woman. I can think of some religions that started with a woman. I think of Mary Baker Eddy, starting Christian Science. Unity was started by a man and a woman. The Fillmores, Divine Science, Nona Brooks. No. So let's make sure but the M makes sense with the 5 M's, right? It works with that. So follow along with me here. So the first M is that all religions begin with a man or woman who has this mystical experience, right? And so, like we are as humans, we want to share the message. We're excited. You know, when you first found Unity, and like, wow, this is great. Everybody needs to know. How come people don't know about this? And you want to get out and you share it with your friends and your family and stuff like that. So it becomes a message. They go out and they share their message. And so then just naturally they have followers, and with the best of intentions, these people create what's called a movement. They want to organize it, organize the teachings, organize certain meeting times and how things are going to be structured. And so then religions tend to then move into what is called the machine, where the teachings crystallize. It becomes more rigid, usually after the leader dies, that man or that woman who had the mystical experience, right? That person dies, it becomes a machine. There's no change. Doctrine is created, and there's inertia. And then eventually that religion becomes a monument. It's a monument to the man. And so there are monuments to Jesus and to the religion. If you go to Europe, you can see the great cathedrals of Europe, museums, monuments to Jesus. They're no longer teaching centers. They're not alive with a thriving community. They're a monument to Jesus and his teachings. So unity, where does that fit in the 5 M's? We call ourselves a movement, and there's a reason why we stick with movement, and that's because we're ever evolving and changing. We want to leave room for growth. There's, I've heard, and maybe it's folklore, unity folklore, but that Charles Fillmore had thought to name unity change, because that is what life is, that we're ever evolving and changing, that it best express the spiritual path. And so unity has also been called a return to first century Christianity. So this idea that we're here to study that original message, that original teaching that came from our master teacher and way shower, and not to create a machine of a religion out of it, right? Jesus had a profound influence on humankind as a whole, in that up until the time that he started preaching and teaching, humans only ever had an experience of separation from God. That's all that they knew. You could pray to God, you could ask God for things, and God could give you guidance, and you can receive blessings from God. But there was always a separation. There was always a God out there and people, down here. Jesus made the greatest discovery of all history, and that is our divinity and our unity with God. And so we're on a quest, a spiritual journey to discover what Jesus discovered, that divinity that is within us. And like I said, it's not a one-time realization like, I got it, I'm there. It's a lifelong journey. There's a wonderful term that I learned to apply to the spiritual journey. I'm in the process of becoming certified in spiritual direction. I'm studying at SMU, and my teacher, wonderful teacher, she taught us this term, perpetual peregrination. That the spiritual journey is perpetual peregrination, which I love because it has some really nice alliteration, right? It's fun to say, perpetual peregrination. Say that with me, perpetual peregrination. So perpetual, meaning like it's ongoing. right? The journey doesn't end, it keeps going, and remembering that we're perpetual, we're eternal. So when I get stuck in thinking, man, there's these things that I really want to study and I really want to do with my life, and I don't seem to have the time, and look at how old I am or whatever, and I remind myself, I'm eternal. There's more than enough time to get to all that. If it's available in the mind of God, it's available to me. And that we have some infinite options available, but we have to choose, right? We can't have all the options at once. So we go with what we're guided to do before us. And so peregrination is a journey. And you may notice with your journey, as I've noticed with mine, that it's not a straight line, direct, that we can get off meandering on different paths and different directions. And as you explore that, and the deeper you get into your spiritual path, the more you see that all that may have seemed like meanderings were all in service of the work that you were here to do on this planet and the growth of your soul and the revealing of the divinity that you are. There are two images associated with the spiritual journey of, with directing our lives towards God. There's the journey, and then there's also rootedness. There's rootedness. And so we have a desire for both. We have a desire to be on the spiritual journey, and we also have a desire to have rootedness. Okay, and the journey takes time, right? So you may see like a rosebud. Eric Butterworth talks about this in chapter 1. A rosebud, and you're like, bloom, bloom. You ever get flowers and they're all buds? And you're like, oh man, come on. I want to see the full bloom, and you really. So if you take a rosebud and you peel it open and you look at like, wow, it's really beautiful, and then it just dies, right? You can't get the full experience of it. It has to bloom in and of its own time. So that's a spiritual journey. And the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verse 28, it says, by law, growth is an unfoldment. It says first the grain, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. So there's a process, and we can't control the growth. Okay, we've got to just trust the process. We've got to trust that God power within us is leading us in the right way. Eric Butterworth says that Jesus was first of all a student on the quest, working to achieve in consciousness the fullness of what Paul called the Christ in you. So Jesus was a student on the quest. How great to know that. He was on a student, and so he was a student on the quest. We can follow his example. So he wasn't born knowing this. I wasn't brought up being told that. That's something that I discovered in this book and through Unity teachings. That was a big aha for me. So when did Jesus discover the power within him? Well, we don't really know. It's not in the Bible. There's a period of time in the Bible that are the lost years, where there's nothing recorded about Jesus. If you look from 11 or 12 years old, when you hear he speaks in the temple, until 30, when he is baptized and he starts his ministry, we don't really know what happened. They're called the lost years, and there's a lot of conjecture around what could have happened. And so many think Jesus must have traveled. He must have studied with some master teachers in India or Egypt, and some even say that he may have made contact with the Druids in England. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke really glorify Jesus' birth narratives, but Mark and John leave it out altogether. Don't say anything about the birth at all. And what's interesting in the Bible, when we're thinking about that Jesus was on a quest, right, a journey of realization, that the people in the town that he grew up in Nazareth, didn't know anything about this miraculous birth that he had, right? They were not on to that whole thing. And Luke 4, 16 to 30 is the rejection of Jesus at Nazareth. Okay, Jesus goes back home to preach. He goes to Nazareth after he's been baptized, ready to preach the word, goes back home, and he goes to a synagogue, and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah. And he reads Isaiah's teaching that that he is the anointed one, the fulfillment of the scriptures, and he tells people that this is him, that he's the fulfillment. And all these people from his town who know him as the carpenter's son, they're like, hey, isn't that Joe's kid? Isn't that guy that we grew up with? He's just, he used to walk around the fields, and this didn't see him as this great, great teacher. And Jesus said, truly, I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. And they didn't react well to this. The scripture says that they were filled with rage, and they chased him out of town to try to run him off a cliff, and somehow he got through the crowd and he got away. So think about that when you want to go preaching in your hometown. When you're trying to share unity with your family, things like that, don't feel bad. Didn't work out too well for Jesus. But why is this so important to know about, that Jesus had this experience? Because it shows that Jesus went on a journey of discovery, that he evolved. He wasn't that same person that they knew that was Joe and Mary's kid, right? He had revealed the truth. He had become the fulfillment of the scriptures. And he was the great example, not the great exception. Charles Fillmore said, throw yourself out of the Trinity and you become an onlooker. Throw yourself into the Trinity and you become an avenue for its expression. So we think of the Trinity. I grew up with this Trinitarian understanding of God, that God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and I'm not a part of that. Right? And in unity, we understand that the Son of the Trinity is the Christ in all of us. And when we realize that and live from that, we become an avenue for the expression of the divine. So it is an unfoldment process, discovering the power within us. And maybe your story doesn't have all the pizzazz of Jesus's, right? All the pomp and circumstance and great costumes, right? Great scenery, lots of movies. And, maybe your journey was more like what we know of the hero's journey. I think about the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the quest for the Holy Grail, Jesus' chalice. And maybe your story is more like Spamalot. You ever seen Spamalot? So it's a musical version of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And you've got King Arthur, who's on this quest for the Holy Grail, which is the chalice that Jesus drank out of in the Last Supper, right? And he's galloping, and his servant Patsy is behind him making galloping noises with a coconut, right? So low-budget stuff, right? You'd be like, well, my journey isn't so fancy like Jesus. Maybe it's a little bit more like that. And this journey to find the Holy Grail, of course, Monty Python, he gathers his Knights of the Round Table, right? And they go on this adventure. And have you seen the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail or Spamalot? Okay, so we're familiar with that. The French taunters and the killer rabbit and the knights who say, me, right? And finally, at the end, they just ask God to lend them a hand, and the holy finger comes down and says, the Grail is right here. And so they discover the Grail. Spoiler alert, the Grail is found. So the great realization of who we are, the divine that we are, it doesn't come in isolation. It comes from a journey where we connect with others on a road, a perpetual peregrination that may take us in different directions and is leading us truly home. And so the second aspect of our spiritual quest, we have the journey, and then we have the desire for rootedness. So where do we find a rootedness? So I wanted to share with you a story that my spiritual direction teacher had shared, that this reflected her spiritual journey. And I thought, oh, this is a great story. It's not in Discover the Power Within You, but I thought it would be fun to share because y'all are mostly Texans, all Texans. A lot of Texans here? All right. No Texans here. You guys here? Okay, yes. It's the legend of the bluebonnet. The bluebonnet, and it's a Native American Comanche legend, and I wanted to share it with you because it has a piece of this rootedness that I want us to hear. Here's the story. A long line of dancers were singing, and they said, "Great spirits, the land is dying. Your people are dying too. Tell us what we have done to anger you. End this drought. Save your people. Tell us what we must do so you will send the rain that will bring back life." And for 3 days, the dancers danced to the sound of drums, and for 3 days, the people called Comanche watched and waited. And even though the winter was over, no healing rains came. Drought and famine are hardest on the very young and the very old. Among the very few children that were left was a small girl who was named She Who Is Alone. She sat by herself watching the dancers, and in her lap was a doll. The doll was made from buckskin. It was a warrior doll, and the eyes and nose and mouth were painted on with the juice of berries. It wore beaded leggings and a belt of polished bone, and on its head were brilliant blue feathers from the bird who cries, "Jay, Jay, Jay." And she loved her doll very much. Soon She Who Is Alone said to her doll, "The shaman will go off alone to the top of the hill and listen for the words of the great spirits. Then we will know what to do, so that once more the rains will come and the earth will be green and alive. The buffalo will be plentiful and the people will be rich again." And as she talked, she thought of her mother who made the doll, of the father who brought the blue feathers. She thought of the grandfather and the grandmother she had never known. They were all like shadows. It seemed long ago that they died from famine. The people had named her and cared for her, and the warrior doll was the only thing that she had left from those distant days. "The sun is setting," the runner called as he ran through the camp. "The shaman is returning." The people gathered in a circle, and the shaman spoke. "I have heard the words of the great spirits," he said. "The people have become selfish. For years they have taken from the earth without giving anything back. The great spirits say the people must sacrifice. We must make a burnt offering of the most valuable possession among us. The ashes of this offering shall then be scattered to the 4 points of the earth, the home of the winds. When the sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. Life will be restored to earth and to the people." The people sang a song of thanks to the great spirits for telling them what they must do. "I'm sure it's not my new bow that the great spirits want," a warrior said. "Or my special blanket," a woman added, as everyone went to their teepees to talk and think over what the great spirits had asked. Everyone except She Who Is Alone. She held her doll tightly to her heart. "You," she said, looking at the doll, "you are my most valued possession. It is you the great spirits want." And she knew what she must do. As the council fires went out and the teepee flaps began to close, the small girl returned to her teepee where she slept and waited. The night outside was still except for the distant sound of the night bird with red wings, and soon everyone in the teepees were asleep except She Who Is Alone. Under the ash of the teepee fire, one stick glowed. She took it, and she crept out into the night. And she ran to a place on the hill where the great spirit spoke to the shaman, and stars filled the sky, but there was no moon. "Oh, great spirits," She Who Is Alone said, "here is my warrior doll. It is the only thing I have from my family who died in this famine. It is my most valued possession. Please accept it." Then she gathered twigs and She started a fire with a glowing fire stick, and the small girl watched as the twigs began to catch and burn. She thought of her grandmother, her grandfather, and her mother and father, and all the people, their suffering and their hunger. And before she could change her mind, she thrust the doll into the fire. And she watched until the flames died down and the ashes had grown cold. Then, scooping up a handful, she who is alone scattered the ashes to the home of the winds, north and east, south and west. And there she fell asleep until the first light of the morning sun woke her. And she looked over the hills, and where ashes had fallen, the ground was covered with flowers, beautiful flowers, as blue as the feathers in the hair of the doll, as blue as the feathers of the bird who cries, "Jay, Jay, Jay." When the people came out of their teepees, they could scarcely believe their eyes. They gathered on the hill with she who is alone to see this miraculous sight. There was no doubt about it. The flowers were a sign of forgiveness of the great spirits. And the people sang and danced their thanks to the great spirits. A warm rain began to fall, and the land began to live again. From that day on, the little girl was known by another name, one who dearly loved her people. And every spring, the great spirits remember the sacrifice of the little girl, and they fill the hills and valleys of the land, now called Texas, with the beautiful blue flowers, even to this very day. So that's the story of the bluebonnets. If you didn't know, I bet if you're Texan, you've heard that one before. So what I learned from this story is that her greatest pain, the loss of her family, that pain that became her greatest gift. She became rooted in her community when she allowed herself to move out of isolation from being she who is alone and to do something in service to her people, to have a heart of community and connection and service. And she changed and became a different person and became she who is dearly loved by her people. And so there's the spiritual journey and there's the desire for rootedness. So we can feel like our spiritual journey is an individual journey, that we're out there, we're having different experiences. Everybody talks about their journey and it's individual. And yet we need that rootedness, that groundedness. And for me, that rootedness and groundedness comes in spiritual community. I came to Unity, and yes, I learned about the power within me, but I kept with my practice and my study because I was with other people who were doing that same practice and that study together. And that truth of who I was, I understood what that was within me. I'd always kind of, knew there was a power within me. I didn't understand that it was the divine, the God energy that I was. And so I encourage you, if you're to connect into the small group, to connect into this community, to have that experience of rootedness and groundedness and connection. It's intrinsic to having that journey within, to have that support of the people around you. And we talk about Unity as being first century Christianity. Jesus always had a community around him. He never traveled alone. He was always traveling with the 12 disciples, right? And so in our spiritual journey, we can tend to, there's so much available now. And people used to just go to the same church maybe their whole lives. And now there's the internet and everything's out there. And it's like, I want to try this, try that, try everything. And one of my spiritual teachers, I think it was Robert Brummett, he said, yes, there are many paths to God. We teach that. But you got to choose one. If you want to go deep, we're talking about going deep with Discover the Power Within You. You can read a lot of books, do a lot of spiritual dabbling, choose a path and stick with it. That's what these 7 weeks are about, really going deep with this teaching. Unity teachings are there for all life. There's no like, oh, I got unity, I'm moving on. You didn't get the depth of it. If that's what you think, you're still on the surface. There's really a deep, rich, lifelong teaching. So what is the goal of this Discover the Power Within You? Eric Butterworth says, every person is a potential Christ, but only a very few know this, and ever fewer succeed in expressing any marked degree of the perfection of the Christ within. We all have a long way to go, but we have a goal that is believable and achievable. So we're all on this journey together, this journey of revealing the divine that we are, and we get to do it rooted in this beautiful spiritual community where there is all love and light and support. So I encourage you to join each other in discovering the power within, seeing that power expressed in an even greater way in our community. So I invite you to join with me in these affirmations. I claim the divine power within me.
I claim the divine power within me.
I know the truth and I am free.
I know the truth and I am free.
And so it is. Go forth and be a light in the world. Bless you.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.